On December 7, 1973, Cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko disembarked from Soyuz 12 at Bikaner Cosmodrome and uttered a phrase that would haunt Soviet psychologists for decades. The chromosphere showed me grammar, not in Russian, in flawless English, with a Midwestern American accent he had never heard. The man had launched speaking only his native tongue and returned carrying linguistic structures from a language he'd never studied, embedded in his neural architecture, like source code written by an external compiler. How does a human brain spontaneously encode 43 phonemes and 11,000 lexical units during ionospheric re-entry? Before we go further, if you're fascinated by classified Soviet space incidents and the cognitive anomalies that governments buried in redacted files, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel digs into the shadows where science meets the unexplainable, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Drop a comment below telling me which Cold War space program had the darkest secrets, Soviet or American, and let's debate. Now, back to Yuri. 3 details frame this incident in singularity. First, Malenchenko's prefrontal glucose metabolism spiked 170% during the 12-minute window when Soyuz 12 transited the South Atlantic anomaly, a region where Earth's magnetosphere dips and radiation intensity multiplies. Soviet telemetry, declassified only in 2008, shows his brainwave oscillations shifted from alpha rhythms to an unclassified theta-delta hybrid. Soviet neurologists codenamed pattern helix. Second, the phrase he spoke referenced the chromosphere, the sun's plasma layer visible only during total eclipses or through hydrogen alpha filters, a spectral phenomenon his mission profile never approached. His trajectory peaked at 412 kilometers, well below the 700-kilometer threshold where solar chromospheric observation becomes optically feasible. Third, linguistic analysis conducted by Dr. Anastasia Volkov at Moscow State University identified his accent as originating from Iowa or southern Minnesota, regions hosting no radio broadcasts powerful enough to penetrate Soviet jamming protocols in 1973. The man had acquired not just vocabulary, but regional dialectical markers, the phonetic fingerprints of communities 8,000 kilometers and one iron curtain away. The mission was unremarkable until it wasn't. Soyuz 12 launched from Site 1 with the 2 cosmonaut crew, tasked with testing a new docking collar for the upcoming Apollo-Soyuz link-up. Malenchenko, the flight engineer, had logged 87 hours in simulators and carried a flawless psychological profile. His dossier mentioned no foreign language aptitude. Beyond mandatory Technika German, the other cosmonaut, Victor, reported nothing unusual during the 71-hour mission, except for one transmission gap. Admission elapsed. Time 48 hours and 16 minutes. While passing over the South Atlantic anomaly, Malenchenko's biotelemetry flatlined for 9 seconds. Not dead, but zero electrical activity, as if his brain had simply powered down and rebooted. When the signal returned, his heart rate had jumped from 62 to 138 beats per minute. Grechko, seated 1 meter away in the cramped capsule, noticed nothing. Malenchenko himself recalled only a sensation he described later as falling upward through a mirror made of phonemes. Re-entry proceeded nominally until the parachutes deployed. Grechko radioed the recovery team in Russian, standard protocol. Malenchenko keyed his microphone and said, "Touchdown in 11 seconds. Chutes are holding at nominal inflation." The recovery team, expecting Russian, requested confirmation. Malenchenko repeated himself, still in English, adding details about hydraulic pressure and descent velocity using terminology from NASA manuals he'd never accessed. Grechko stared at him, later testifying that Malenchenko seemed unaware he'd switched languages. When the capsule hit Kazakh soil, Malenchenko stepped out and greeted the recovery team with, "That chromosphere business really reconfigures your syntax, doesn't it?" The lead physician, Dr. Pavel Kuznetsov, immediately quarantined both cosmonauts, citing potential neurological contamination. The next 72 hours unfolded in a medical isolation ward beneath Star City, where Soviet space medicine wrestled with an impossible patient. Malenchenko oscillated between Russian and English, sometimes within the same grammatical clause, a code switch in pathology linguists called transient bilingual emergence, but had never documented in a monolingual subject. Neurologist Dr. Irina Sobchuk administered a battery of tests. Malenchenko could recite English verb conjugations he'd never memorized, identify idioms from regions he'd never visited, even correct subtle grammatical errors in sentences read to him by American defectors brought in as linguistic controls. Yet he couldn't explain how he knew. When asked to describe his thought process, he said, "It's like the knowledge was always there, but compressed, and something in the chromosphere unzipped the file." Sobiak's report, leaked in 2016, noted that Malenchenko's brain scans showed thickened myelin sheaths in Broca's area and Wernicke's area, the language processing centers, a structural change typically requiring years of intensive study, not a 3-day span. The Kremlin classified the entire incident under Protocol 7, a designation reserved for phenomena that defied materialist explanation. Malenchenko was barred from future missions and assigned to a desk job calculating orbital decay. The CIR, tipped off by a signals intelligence intercept, sent operatives to interview Soviet emigres who might have had contact with Star City personnel. They compiled a dossier codenamed Polyglot Descent, speculating that the South Atlantic anomaly's radiation had somehow activated dormant neural pathways, or, more radically, that Malenchenko had encountered a non-human intelligence capable of imprinting linguistic data directly into human wetware. The Americans had their own reasons to worry. Apollo crews had reported strange dreams and sensory distortions while passing through the same radiation belt, but none had spontaneously acquired Russian. By 1976, the Soviet Academy of Sciences convened a secret symposium to explore mechanisms. Physicist Dr. Leonid Krakov proposed that high-energy particles in the South Atlantic anomaly could theoretically induce quantum entanglement between widely separated neurons, creating instant informational bridges that bypassed normal learning. Malenchenko's brain might have entangled with electromagnetic signals, perhaps Voice of America broadcasts bouncing off the ionosphere, though this required believing that entanglement could encode semantic meaning, a concept quantum mechanics had no framework for. Another researcher, Dr. Mikhail Orlov, suggested microtubule coherence, a proto-theory that wouldn't gain traction until the 2000s, proposing that radiation triggered quantum computations in the brain's cellular scaffolding, computations that could, in principle, access information encoded in the quantum foam of spacetime itself. Both theories were dismissed as too speculative, but neither could be disproven. Malenchenko's English fluency didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. By the early 80s, he was reading American technical journals without dictionaries and conversing with NASA liaisons during the Apollo-Soyuz follow-ups. Shocking administrators who knew his pre-flight profile. His Russian colleagues avoided him, spooked by a man who'd been rewritten at the neurological level. He married an American translator in 19, moved to Kaliningrad, and vanished from public records after the Soviet collapse. The last confirmed sighting came in 2003, when a journalist tracked him to a dacha outside Malenchenko. Then 68 agreed to one interview. He described recurring dreams where he stood inside the sun's chromosphere, watching words float past like hieroglyphs made of plasma. Language isn't learned, he said. It's received. We're just radios tuned to the wrong frequency until something retunes us. The journalist asked what retuned him. Malenchenko smiled and said, "Whatever lives in the places we're not supposed to go." Here's where the incident intersects with classified material still buried. In 1974, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency launched Project Babelsgate, a black book neurological program exploring whether electromagnetic fields could weaponize language acquisition. Subjects were exposed to modulated ELF waves while listening to foreign broadcasts. Results were abysmal, with most participants developing severe aphasia rather than fluency. But one memo, released through a FOIA request in 2014, mentioned spontaneous polyglotism in high radiation environments and cited an unnamed Soviet incident as proof of concept. The memo's author speculated that Earth's magnetosphere acts as a linguistic medium, storing the cumulative radio chatter of civilization in its plasma currents, and that sufficiently intense radiation exposure could download that data into human neural tissue, like flashing firmware onto a chip. The program was shuttered in 1977 after 3 test subjects permanently lost their ability to speak any language. Now jump to 2080, a private space tourism company, whose name remains redacted, reported that 2 passengers on a suborbital flight experienced transients in speaking fragmentary Mandarin and Arabic. During the 4-minute weightlessness window, despite having no prior exposure to either language, the FAA investigated, found no mechanical cause, and classified the file. One of the passengers, a software engineer from Texas, later posted on an anonymous forum claiming the experience felt like downloading a language pack in a dream. The post was deleted within 6 hours. Speculation erupted in fringe aerospace communities that the South Atlantic anomaly, or perhaps radiation belts in general, function as informational interfaces, regions where the membrane between human cognition and some larger data reservoir becomes permeable. Let's examine the chromosphere reference, because it's the key anomaly inside the anomaly. The chromosphere is a 1,500-kilometer thick layer of the sun's atmosphere where temperatures paradoxically rise from 6,000 to 20,000 Kelvin as you move away from the photosphere, defying thermodynamic expectations. It's also where solar prominences, massive loops of plasma, erupt and reconnect according to magnetic field lines. Some astrophysicists theorize that these plasma structures could encode information through their magnetic topology, a kind of natural data storage written in flux tubes and current sheets. If Malenchenko's brain somehow resonated with chromospheric emissions during a solar flare, And if the South Atlantic anomaly acted as a focusing lens for that resonance, you'd have a mechanism, however implausible, for information transfer. The missing variable is intent. Random solar noise doesn't organize itself into Iowa phonetics. Either the chromosphere contains structured data, or something using the chromosphere as a transmission medium deliberately targeted the coreferential chain matters. Chromosphere, grammar, retuning. Malenchenko consistently described the phenomenon in terms of reception and configuration, not learning. His brain didn't study English. It was configured to contain English, as if someone had edited his source code. This implies a technology or natural process capable of treating human cognition as a writable media. Current neuroscience has no parallel. You can stimulate brain regions to evoke memories or movements, but you can't inject complex knowledge structures wholesale. Even advanced brain-computer interfaces require extensive training periods. Malenchenko skipped that. His fluency was instant and complete, suggesting informational bandwidth and encoding precision far beyond our capabilities. Consider the timeline. 1973 places the incident during the height of Soviet parapsychology research. The Kremlin funded programs exploring telepathy, remote viewing, and psychokinesis, hoping to find military applications. What if Malenchenko was already part of an undisclosed experiment, and the spaceflight was a trial run? His psychological profile's perfection might have been the point. Perhaps Soviet scientists had developed a technique to presensitize cosmonauts' brains to informational inputs using classified electromagnetic treatments, and the South Atlantic anomaly was the trigger they'd engineered. This would explain why Grechko experienced nothing. He wasn't primed. But it raises the question of why the Soviets would choose English as the test language, unless they were reverse engineering a captured American asset. A cosmonaut who defected and been neurologically interrogated. The layers of secrecy make verification impossible, but the pattern fits. Fast forward to current aerospace developments. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and other entities are launching civilians into radiation environments previously accessed only by career astronauts. None have publicly reported xenoglossia, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If the phenomenon is real but rare, requiring specific neurological preconditions and precise radiation exposure profiles, we might see more cases as flight cadence increases. Or maybe we already have, and they're being quietly classified. The International Outer Space Treaty includes provisions for information sharing about space-related anomalies, but it also grants nations discretion over security's sensitive data. A cognitive reprogramming event would absolutely qualify. The engineering implications are staggering. If radiation can rewrite neural tissue to encode language, it can encode anything. Muscle memory for surgical techniques, mathematical intuitions, even personality traits. You'd have a mechanism for instant expertise, eliminating the learning curve for any skill reducible to neural patterns. Military applications alone would justify infinite black budget funding. Imagine soldiers uploaded with combat reflexes, pilots preloaded with aircraft handling characteristics, diplomats embedded with native cultural fluency. The ethical nightmare is obvious, but history shows that ethical nightmares rarely stop technological development. They just drive it underground, cryptographically. There's another angle. If the chromosphere or radiation belts can store and transmit information, they could serve as a covert communication channel, encode data in modulated particle streams, beam them through the magnetosphere, and retrieve them via neurologically sensitive receivers, human or otherwise. No radio intercepts, no satellite vulnerabilities, just brains tuned to the right frequency catching messages written in ions. Science fiction. Except Malenchenko's case suggests the receiving end already works. We're just missing the transmission protocol. So what actually happened? Theory 1. Malenchenko's brain spontaneously reorganized under radiation stress, and the English fluency was a coincidental neural artifact, pattern-matching randomness that happened to resemble a real language. Probability astronomically low. Theory 2. He was a deep-covered asset who faked the whole thing, using the incident to inject disinformation into Soviet and American intelligence. Motive unclear, but Cold War paranoia provides plenty. Theory 3. The South Atlantic anomaly genuinely functions as an informational conduit, and Malenchenko intercepted a signal, natural or artificial, that reprogrammed his linguistic faculties. Theory 4. Non-human intelligence, monitoring our space activities, decided to demonstrate their presence by rewriting a cosmonaut's brain, choosing English as a calling card because it would maximize geopolitical confusion. Each theory requires accepting at least one impossibility. The incident never repeated, or at least never repeated publicly, which is its own data point. If the phenomenon were purely environmental, we'd expect more cases as spaceflight became routine. The singularity suggests either Malenchenko's neurology was unique, the circumstances were unreproducible, or subsequent incidents have been successfully suppressed. Given the classification creep around aerospace medicine data, option 3 gains weight. One final detail haunts the file. In his 2003 interview, Malenchenko mentioned that his dreams of the chromosphere intensified whenever solar activity peaked. He tracked sunspot cycles obsessively, claiming he could feel the sun's magnetic fields shifting days before official forecasts. "It's still talking," he said. "I'm still listening." The journalist asked what it was saying. Malenchenko paused, then replied that we're going to need better ears. He died 6 months later, an aneurysm, sudden and unexplained. His autopsy, performed by a Lithuanian coroner, noted unusual metallic deposits in his hippocampus and amygdala, elements not naturally occurring in human tissue. Ionisotopes with ratios inconsistent with terrestrial geology. The coroner flagged it as contamination, possibly from his cosmonaut days, or possibly from something he brought back that stayed with him until it didn't. Decades later, the questions compound instead of resolving. Did Yuri Malenchenko make contact with an intelligence using language as proof of interaction? Did Soviet experiments in neurocognitive manipulation succeed beyond their wildest projections, then spiral into uncontrollable territory? Is the South Atlantic anomaly a window, a weapon, or a warning? We build our rockets higher, faster, carrying more civilians into spaces where the rules bend, and somewhere in those bend spaces, information waits, patient and structured, for brains calibrated to receive it. The chromosphere still turns, plasma braiding itself into patterns we interpret as physics. But maybe some of those patterns are syntax. Maybe some are instructions. And maybe the next person who comes back speaking the impossible won't be a Soviet cosmonaut with a Midwestern accent. Maybe they'll be speaking something we don't have a name for yet. Something that reconfigures Not just language, but the cognitive architecture underneath it. The foundational code that makes us human, or something adjacent. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who needs to be subscribed to this channel. We're just getting started on the classified incidents and unexplained phenomena that space agencies don't want in your feed. Hit that subscribe button, smash the notification bell so you catch every upload, and drop your wildest theory in the comments below. What do you think happened to Mel? Radiation accident, Soviet experiment, alien contact, or something we don't have words for? Let's build this theory together. And if you know someone who's obsessed with Cold War mysteries or the weird side of space exploration, share this video with them right now. The algorithm buries content like this, so your share actually matters. Yuri Malenchenko returned from space carrying someone else's language in his neurons, and we still don't know whose. That should terrify you, or excite you, or probably bot. Until the next classified file surfaces, keep looking up, but maybe keep wondering what's looking back.